But this evening, we're all here to hear from the fantastic Dr. Elisa Sani, and I know she will be known to many of you. She is, of course, a fellow FPS committee member who's in charge of our research grants program. If you're interested in more information about that, have a look on our website. But this evening, she's here to talk to us about her new book. Elisa was assistant curator of ceramics and glass at the Victoria and Albert Museum from 2006 to 2012. And she received her PhD from Siena University with a focus on Italian Renaissance lustreware. Today, though, she's speaking to us about her brand new book, which is the first ever catalogue devoted to the Courtauld's wonderful ceramics collection, Italian MAIOLICA, and also other early modern ceramics. And we're so pleased to have her here. So Elisa, without any further ado, over to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Caroline. It's really a pleasure to be here. So happy to see so many of you. Thank you, Caroline and Felix, and wonderful Felix, have been so supportive of us all in the committee. And I'm so Felix tonight. I'm so happy tonight to be presenting you a part of the Courtauld Collection, which is a lot less known than the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist paintings that we all loved and know from the Courtauld. I was particularly interested in this collection, which I saw for the first time with John Mullett. And John Mullett himself has written an article on the collection in 1967, just a year after the collection arrived to the Courtauld, and that article has been one of the first articles on MAIOLICA I've read, and I always treasure the fact that it was one of the first articles I read, and I was able then eventually to publish the collection myself. The collection arrived at the Courtauld as part of the Gambier-Parry bequest in 1966, being collected much earlier by Thomas Gambier-Parry, a wonderful figure, a Victorian man, collector, artist, inventor, great traveler in Europe. And the catalogue has a long essay by me and Alexandra Gerstein, Sasha, who is the curator of the collection of sculpture and decorative arts at the Courtauld, which we really try to outline how the collection was put together and how it really fits within the life of a collector, which was also an artist himself, so how really the collection relates really closely to particularly the art that Thomas Gambier-Parry loved and he also practiced as an artist himself. As I said, the collection arrived thanks to Thomas Gambier-Parry's grandson, who was Mark Gambier-Parry, who really fought to keep the collection together, his grandfather collection together, which was been put together between the 1840s and the 1860s, or 70s mainly, and was displayed in Gloucester, just outside Gloucester, Hyneham Court, which was the seat of where Thomas Gambier-Parry lived, and is where he also built a church, completely decorated the church with one of his innovative techniques that he invented, which I will talk a little bit more later. I'll show you some of his paintings. The Gambier-Parry bequest has the majority of the pieces are beautiful medieval Renaissance paintings, which are on display at the Courtauld. In this photograph here in the middle of the screen, we can see some of the paintings are shown here, how they were displayed in the drawing room, the library at Hyneham, just outside Gloucester. And in a more recent image, is the same room, which shows how also the MAIOLICA and other applied arts, such as Islamic metalwork, ivory, Limoges enamel, and glass, were displayed in the room together with the paintings. and how the style of things that the collector liked, particularly the religious art of the Italian Renaissance, the early Renaissance, the 15th century, how is reflected in what is shown and represented on his Maiolica. Is actually, I will go back just to show very quickly a very important piece of art by Thomas, which is the church he decorated with one of his techniques he learned. He was so inspired by the medieval artists he loved, and invented a new medium for adapting the frescoes of Mediterranean regions to the colder climate of England and the rainy side of Gloucester. And with very bright colors, he produced a very striking type of art inspired by the medieval art he liked. And so is this sort of continued narrative of the Maiolica he loved and his love for painting is shown by the presence of one of his pieces of ceramics in one of his own paintings. And this is a discovery I made by visiting the places he decorated, such as Ely Cathedral and Gloucester Cathedral. And this particular piece is in Tewkesbury Abbey, also in Gloucestershire, and it's a great altarpiece with many panels up with the stories of the life of Christ. And in the panel with the Last Supper in the corner, he has painted one of his Spanish lusterware vases. It's a very striking shape of vase. It's a double cup flower vase, typical of really that Spanish influence, Islamic influence on Spanish ceramics is so distinctive that they cannot not have been taken from his own vase with this shape. And this, I think, although it's a small detail in a large altarpiece, I think shows well his love for his collection of ceramics, how he influenced his art, and how much he appreciated his collection. His earliest piece of Maiolica that he collected is actually one of those, another striking two-end of vase. It's a type of vase we associate often with marriage wear, with Maiolica of love. We associate those type of vases with new couples, especially this vase as portraits, profile portraits of a young man and a young woman. We think they might have been given as gifts for a wedding or betrothal. And this is actually is a very rare shape, it's very rare survival type of vase. And we associate these vases also with the flowers of the Virgin Mary. Often in medieval and early Renaissance art, in scenes of the Annunciation, the flowers of the Virgin, the lily, the white lilies, are in vases of similar shape. And Gambier-Parry in particular loved the scene of the Annunciation. He painted it in his church on Hynam, that we've seen before. There's details of the nave of Hynam is full of vases of similar shape. Also, several of the paintings which arrived at the Courtauld have the same, similar shape. What it is also important about this vase is the painted decoration, apart from the lovely shape. And we know that this really at the end of the 15th century is when really painting starts to become increasingly important and increasingly sophisticated and decorations are used, and this is well witnessed by the vase that shows opposite a human figure as well as many ornaments. I cannot not show you some images from our favorite book of MAIOLICA scholars, the 3 books of the potter's art, a famous image of the painters at work, and in which is shown on the right-hand side the bearded figure sitting down, painting one of these vases. We see, as Piccolo Pasto explains to us, that if you paint a vase on any hollowware, you should have your left hand, the manca, the mano manca, inside the vase to hold it steady. And with the right, you should do the decoration while resting it on your seat, on your leg while you're seated. And this is particularly important to MAIOLICA painter. Piccolo Pasto always stress that MAIOLICA painter work sitting down because of that. This is perhaps somehow not followed by a 20th century artist, one of those major, protagonists of the revival of the art of painting at the Ruta, Waldo Grazia, which is shown in these lovely photographs on the right-hand side of the screen, how he held steady actually his arm while standing up, having the left arm under his right arm, while he keeps steady his brush with which he's painting. Piccolo Pasto remembers art, the art of making brushes, because the key, because of the importance of painting, and he shows us how to make brushes. And he tells us that they all had to be made of animals' hair. The animals were all alive, which is no cruelty on animals on MAIOLICA. They were either taken from goat's hair, from the sides of the goat, or from the mane of the donkeys, from their heads. But he also remembers that for very fine works, you should use the whiskers of mice. And sometimes I imagine one of the assistants seen in the painters at work drawing, going around the workshop looking for mice to take in hair for their brushes. And perhaps some of the finest works in the court are well made with those brushes, very fine. You can see 3 examples of really the spectacular quality of the Gambier-Parry collection. And at the same time, you can see well the aesthetic that he was going for, the type of beauties that he was particularly attracted to. Those Renaissance virgins of his paintings are reflected here in the images of the Belladonna on the left, with this sad, serious profile cast into this beautiful deep blue. A similar profile seen on pharmacy jars made at the Ruta at the beginning of the century, but cast on a very bright yellow. Is really the art of painting, is the triumph of the collection, and is really at the center. The attention is to the beginning of the first sort of quarter, 30 years of the 16th century. Really, the art is reaches great heights. Aside from the painting, there's the added interest of the inscriptions, and I can never stress enough how rare would have been the letters, how new would have been the art of painting letters in a society in which very few people could read and write, and in which really it was the beginning of writing as we know today, especially in Italian at the time. You write, there were manuals telling and teaching people the art of handwriting, and some are published really at the same time in which MAIOLICA painters start using inscriptions in their wares. And we always think perhaps there was one particularly talented at writing in the workshop who would perhaps work throughout pieces painted by other painters. As we know, writing was something which was limited to a very limited number, and also how the woman receiving perhaps the ball with Tarsia, would she be able to write and would she be able to read the inscription on the piece that was given to her? And it's a fascinating question that sometimes make me wonder. Among other beautiful pharmacy jars in which you see the same interest in portraits, are a small group with a very good selection of shapes of the pharmacy jars made in Castelli d'Abruzzo. And we now know they're made in Castelli d'Abruzzo, where for a long time were attributed to different centers, made in the workshop of Orazio Pompei in Castelli, a small town on the foot of the Mount Gran Sasso in the Abruzzo, really remote area. Those very different and varied shapes were made, particularly distinctive were the dragon-spouted jars that are really we associate with this type of pottery. And again, we can admire this beautiful inscription in different styles, like the Gothic script capitals, that here obviously tell vital information, which is what content is meant to be held in the particular jar. We can imagine how beautifully those vessels would have looked on the shelf of a pharmacy, or maybe just a princely, not just, but a princely pharmacy. There was an enormous interest in medicine in the Renaissance, and the quality of the beauty of the pharmacy jars, Maiolica pharmacy jar, really a witness to that. It's always fun to remember how Alfonso d'Este, the Duke of Ferrara, entrusted Titian, the painter Titian, to make sure that his pharmacy jars made in Venice were beautiful enough for his pharmacy, while at the same time his wife, Lucrezia Borgia, was ordering medicines as far as Jerusalem by friars who would bring them back for her. So very precious medicines that they had to be held in special containers that could not be more beautiful than Maiolica. It's really, I cannot show you all the pieces of the Maiolica of the Cambiapari, but there's really a strong interest in the painted figure. And this is shown really well by one of the masterpieces of the collection. It's a unique figure in lusterware. This dish made at De Ruta in gold luster and blue, with the figure of one of the three kings, this young, elegant man, which really like stepping out of a Renaissance paintings. And in fact, he is taken directly from a large fresco painted by the leading artist, really, in the early 16th century, Perugino, which is an Umbrian painter, and was particularly, his prototype, his models were particularly used by De Ruta potters of Perugia, where Perugino had workshops. At workshops was near, obviously, De Ruta, and that's the link is important. And it just is one of those connections made really in heaven, the fact that Cambiapari had as one of his favorite artists, Perugino, and times he goes and visits churches in Italy to see Perugino's paintings. And although we don't know whether he knew that this was taken, the figure of one of his dishes was taken straight from a Perugino painting, he certainly would have loved this imagery of the sort of art he liked. I also cannot imagine that one of his own paintings, this one of the panels of the roof nave of Ely Cathedral, which he decorated after the death of Harry Lesage, which was in the process of finishing of decorating Ely Cathedral. Gambier Parry very characteristically and generously, he takes over and finished the works at his own expenses and single-handedly painted this beautiful nave, and I really recommend going see the cathedral to appreciate really his art. But in particular here, I just cannot not imagine him having been influenced by Perugino's Nativity. One of them, one of the many that the painter produced during his career. And what is particularly amusing is how, if the composition is truly inspired by the painting, the Renaissance painting, we can see that baby Jesus on the lap of the Virgin is completely clothed, while in the Renaissance version is healthy, obviously, all the interest in to show that he's a healthy baby and is completely naked, and the Victorian version is very, is completely covered and everything is very covered. In his MAIOLICA as well, Gambier Parry would always go for scenes that show his, his sort of how he felt about religion, and obviously is very much a man of his time. And this is shown again that by some other lusterware dishes he has. It's a lovely luster. The first one, with the bird feeding his chicks, perhaps a pelican with his peaty, and which obviously is a very poignant iconography for him, who lost his first wife and had some of his children died in infancy, and the other one with the mother teaching a child to read, which is a lovely Raphael composition, and deriving from the beautiful original drawing at Chatsworth by Raphael, and which was engraved by Marcantonio Raimondi, and it was taken by Deruta Potters, who painted them in those dishes. This is the sort of imagery that the collector go for, with strongly devotion familial images that he could relate. In fact, this sentiment, particularly its religious sentiment, is shown specifically on his small Historiato collection, unlike many of Victorian collectors who really made Historiato narrative, MAIOLICA with narrative images and figures, the focus of their collection. Gambier Parry has a very small number of Historiato, and all of his Historiato are painted with religious images. And this actually is quite rare, because the majority of Historiato are classical or Ovidian tales. There's sort of the gods frolicking in the woods, or nymphs in the sea, and is really not the sort of subject that Gambier Parry, which is called himself, consider himself an Anglo-Catholic, with all his interest in religious art and being very religious himself, would have appreciated. And in fact, among his pieces of Historiato, there's this really little masterpiece with the crucifixion, which is an extremely rare subject to have on a piece of tableware. It is a footed dish, a footed bowl on high foot, which is not just extraordinarily beautiful by all the figures painted onto the dish with this wonderful variation of colors. They almost look like a watercolor, really, with also the subtlety on the of the tones, but also as the variety of being decorated on the underside with angels, with the instruments of the Passion of the Christ. So it's a subject that connects the front and the back in a really unique way, and it's an extremely rare piece. It was bought in 1848, really at the beginning of his collecting MAIOLICA, from the Duke of Buckingham sale store, and he made several purchases of that sale, and some of them were coming through the Duke of Buckingham from the collection of the Medici Grand Dukes of Tuscany. And this happy discovery has really made more vivid this connection between English connoisseurs going and visiting Italy, especially during their grand tour, and some of them acquiring pieces of MAIOLICA directly from the Grand Dukes, who considered them out of fashion at the time, prefer Chinese porcelain or other ceramics, and they could come, you know, and fill the cabinets of collectors in England. Particularly Gambiapari was, aside from collecting a store, it was, you know, traveling to Italy frequently and buying several pieces directly in Italy. Is another piece of his religious MAIOLICA, and there's a very vivid scene of the crossing of the Red Sea, in which there's this swirling waves of the sea, the vertical waves that show how they're deriving from a little Bible book, the Biblische Historien, which will become an important source as mediada of these little Bible books for MAIOLICA painters, particularly during the second part of the 16th century, when MAIOLICA, religious MAIOLICA, becomes more prominent because of the Counter-Reformation. And whenever I go and look in libraries at the small Bible book, I'm really astonished how from a very, very small book into a really size, almost a matchbox size print, they can then use for their decorations on MAIOLICA, adding colors and really make them very vivid. This is one of the few pieces of MAIOLICA in the Gambiapari which has a signature. We don't have any of the famous name in the Storiato John, such as Francesco Santovelli or Maestro Giorgio da Gubbio. We have this, for instance, this is a much rarer name. It's an artist from Faenza, Gian Battista dalle Palle, which signs this edition in 1560. And I think it's just because Gambiapari would not follow just the trends, everyone collecting Ralph Nall or Andrew Fanta would have plenty of pieces signed by the masses. I just much prefer, I think that he was just looking at subjects and being attracted to religious subjects, and it would just make this the focuses of his collection. He's I would just want to share the last piece of Renaissance MAIOLICA I want to show you is the piece we chose for the cover, this lovely roundel with a little female saint in the center. She's holding the palm of martyr on a book. Is like in a miniature, little miniature style depicted in the center of this dish, which has the beautiful orange ground with palmette and grotesque. Is really the religious image in the middle, and sort of more classically inspired border, as often in MAIOLICA, two strong influences. They are combined together with this rich coloring of the orange. We also another beautifully decorated reverse with scale work and some initial which we have not been able to really interpret. The dish is part of a small series of 3 other dishes with religious figures in the middle. This particular dish was acquired by Thomas Gambier-Parry because he thought that the saint was Saint Lucy, and he had a daughter called Lucy who died when she was 20. He opened an orphanage in her name and also an hospital for the poor in Gloucester called Saint Lucy, really in honor of her. And it's just it's beautiful to imagine him being very fond of this dish because of the connection with his daughter. What we have researched, and we can see you can see in the book, is the fact that perhaps this SL, the names, the initials there, are not really for St. Lucy, but perhaps for another saint. And perhaps Gambier-Parry will not be so happy about this interpretation, but we can see that the saint does not hold the classical symbols of the saint, which is the eyes or a lamp or even a candle associated with St. Lucy, which is always as the eyes as for martyrdom. There's a painting by Dossodossi, which has actually a similar saint being painted on, and as is inscribed Saint Lucretia. So perhaps this was the saint meant to be represented, and the saint was actually very much rarely represented, a small martyr from Spain, and this association with Saint Lucretia and perhaps make us can put forward the hypothesis that the dish might have been made for Lucrezia Borgia, perhaps in Ferrara, by Faenza potters, where we know there was a kiln, and we know also that Faenza potters worked. And this, following this iconography from Dossodossi, who was a court artist when Lucrezia was there, it might have been made for a court when perhaps she wasn't in the mood for eating of gold or silver as she would have often done at court. A detail which I love spot on MAIOLICA are the little holes made around the rounder. You can see the triangles, one here and the top there, which they were made as shown by the drawing by Piccol Passo when the dish was fired for the second time. And you can see the little how it was placed in the saga, and obviously the little signs are sometimes visible, and it's lovely how to show how the spire were painted out. Really the miracle of painting such wares and how they come out brilliantly beautiful and bright as this little precious dish. Among the later MAIOLICA in the collection, there's a lovely group of Ligurian ceramics, blue and white ceramics. I really fell in love with this type of wares. They are extremely elaborate. There's 2 large dishes with the same coat of arms. I just show one there. They are really molded in high relief, but they are incredibly light despite being over 50 centimeters. They are really impressive pieces of ceramics. They have the appearance and the coloring of Chinese porcelain, but then the molding is really inspired by silver, but also by stucco decoration that they're of really the beautiful Ligurian tradition at Genoa. And they're really spectacular. They were so spectacular that they were on occasion used instead of silver at court. For example, the Monaco, the Ranieri at Monaco would use them for on occasion, and they were loved by the Grand Dukes of Florence, who ordered thousands of pieces of Maiolica, which just one is left today. And they were made into very large pharmacy jars, such as the Stagnone, with the animal handles, so you can see on the right of the screen, which they're really imposing jars. And they became very popular, and they were really exported as far afield as Jerusalem, where there's a pharmacy still there today of that has a wonderful collection of those pharmacy jars. They are not just very elaborate with their molding, but also there's a lot of painting. Sometimes the painting on this occasion, or this particular pharmacy jar, is inspired by the frescoes, so those beautiful palaces in Genoa. And here the Neptune and Proserpina is taken by Valerio Castello, which is this lovely sort of association and connotation between decoration and what mural decoration, what we can find on a pharmacy jars meant to perhaps to go to a monastery in the Holy Land. Really extraordinary. And if you want to know more about Ligurian, beautiful Ligurian Maiolica, there's a book by Marco Spallanzani, which is entirely dedicated about this trend for the Medici rule, the Grand Dukes, and the nobility of Tuscany to have wares from Liguria, and the beautiful tesauros della tradizione delle ceramiche di Liguria by Cecilia Chilosi, which is all there is to know about lovely Ligurian ceramics. Here, by choosing pieces of the blue and white ceramics, Gambier Parry was really setting a trend which wasn't in the 1850s and 60s completely not popular, and both individually really another sign of his independence of taste. There's just one French piece, but it's a beautiful example of lead glaze earthenware, this gorgeous complex puzzle jug, which is decorated with incised, applied, engraved decoration to a very complex shape of really a tubular vase to which another layer of ceramics had been applied to show it how impossible it would be to drink from it, and actually you can drink from it, with these lovely 3 handles. And there's this is a product of the potteries of Saintonge, where in Saint, in the Archaeological Museum, we can see fragments of molds very similar to this. They often have royal symbols of France. And the tradition really from the Middle Ages up until the 17th century and beyond of those lovely wares, really inventive and really striking. So nothing similar to this is in the collection. There's also a few pieces of Spanish lusterware included in the catalogue. They're all 16th and 17th century painting. There's this very beautiful large molded dish with this unusual coil decoration in the middle and a Christian inscription around it, of a type that was very popular in Italy, but just by the time this was made in the early 16th century, the Italian luster had taken over the fashion in Italy, but was still collected, and some of this Spanish luster was bought directly from Italian collectors. Gambier Parry especially was bought from Alessandro Castellani, which is a very important name in the history of collecting Maiolica in the second part of the 16th century, as well as for jewelry, being the families of jeweler, and the little Oza, the little four-handled jar, which is lovely to hold as a small object of this small collection of Spanish lusterware. There are also a few examples of Iznik pottery, really a handful, but they're all very beautiful. And Gambier Parry himself says that he bought all of this before the craze for the fashion for this, which will be the second part of the towards the end of the 19th century. And he was particularly proud of those purchases. And he had this lovely jug with the scale work and this particularly strong emerald green, then with the cutouts of leaves with dots of red. It's particularly interesting, this piece, not just because of this beauty, but also because he has a mount which was made in Victorian times. It's an English mount, 1855, shows how a piece was already arrived in England and how they tried to make an Islamic inspired mount, which is quite a rare thing. And this obviously matches the earlier English Tudor mounts that were made for these types of tankas when they arrived in at the time of Elizabeth I in England. So this is a Victorian equivalent, which is really, really nice. One of these beautiful dishes. There's 3 more in the collection. This is particularly beautiful with this beautiful white tulips, with the cutouts of tulips, and the blue, turquoise, and the dark blue, and the green, sage green of the earlier pieces before the red, the beautiful seal wax red, become prevalent in the second part. We don't know where the species were acquired. They might as well be, some of them being acquired in the dishes might have been acquired in Italy. We know there was a vivid exchange of Iznik pottery in Italy during the Renaissance, especially in Genoa, especially in Venice. And it made complete sense for us to include the species that they look like they come from very different places, certainly made obviously footwear in a very different material from MAIOLICA, but it made sense because they're all part of the same culture and in the same collection. You could have found in Renaissance being used, being appreciated at the same table or the same in the same rooms. You could have had Spanish lusterware, Iznik pottery alongside MAIOLICA, and certainly in a less more rigid way in which we tend to divide and catalog them today. I just want to talk about just a couple of examples of sort of restoration and changes we made in the collection. And this was one of the most interesting, is a vase, as you can see from the left-hand side. The image arrived at the Courtauld as a vase, and it was clearly a jug, a pharmacy jar for waters, that at some point lost its spout, perhaps to be sold as a vase, which is much more marketable than a spouted or a syrup jar. And it was being covered over the spout when he arrived. And with conservation, we were for a long time with Sasha guessing, we were not sure what to do about it, but we had a strong really the will to want it to be displayed at some point, and obviously without the spout it's impossible to be displayed. So we made this wonderful journey to the Farmacia di Santa Maria Novella in Florence, which I recommend everyone to go and see and obviously admire the beautiful, the waters, the perfumes that they still make today. And it is one of the eldest really apothecaries making medicinal waters in Europe, starting in the 13th century, and it's been in operation since the 14th century as commercially selling those rose waters and other aromatic waters. And it is following examples that are still in the pharmacy there. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen that Tiago Oliveira, the restorer, could restore the vase to as it was. And you can see the emblem of the Dominican emblems of the owners of the pharmacy on the bottom. The peculiarity of those jars is there's no inscription, and this was to leave the apothecaries much freer to use the pharmacy jars as they wanted them to use, and it is quite rare because often, as we've seen everything, and they would just perhaps write it with oil paint or to attaching parchment to the vase in this way. Another perhaps unusual piece is this Venetian dish, which when I saw it was really striking, and we can see clearly that it wasn't really a Renaissance piece. Is also more suspicious because on the reverse, you can see it's clearly it's been scratched or whatever was written on the back, and it's obviously even more suspicious. And this dish was bought by Gambiapari as an original rare piece of Venetian Maiolica, and is featured recently in the exhibition on fakes at the Courtauld, which you might have visited. And it's quite striking because he has on the front a Doge of Venice, or the greatest authority of the Venetian Republic, and he has the name Marco Barbarigo. He was Doge in 1485, and he has the date at the front. And the seller of the dish to Thomas Gambiapari, which is quite a reputable dealer in Venice, who sold other things to him on the same day in 1858, he obviously dated the dish to the date painted at the front. But what we think is that the back, there was actually the original date of the dish or signature. There was a modern signature, and someone has scratched that in order to be selling the piece as an original Venetian. And this is something quite interesting in the history of how these things were marketed and sold. In general, Gambiapari had a wonderful taste and a great eye for quality, and this is the only case we know of one fake present in the collection. It's very interesting also having the bill for how much he paid for it. And he paid more than for Islamic metal or pieces of Islamic metal, obviously, because he considered that a very important piece. I just want to finish by just a very, very recent image that I saw today. I don't know if any of you has visited Collect, the craft fair at Somerset House, and there's an exhibition there by Catherine Moy, which shows some pieces that were inspired by the pieces by the Maiolica, the Courtauld, that they are shown again since the Courtauld has reopened in 2021. Particularly inspiring was the dragon-spouted jar inspired by those that we saw, the Orsini Colonna from Abruzzo. And this was all a display which was dedicated to menopause. Is called a menopause in Maiolica. And it's lovely how contemporary ceramics has still really be influence and inspire new makers. And this in particular was particularly lovely to see this jar with the oak leaves, also by Catherine. This has been directly inspired by a piece in the Courtauld, which is really our mystery jar, and is terribly damaged. It's lost its handles, and there's a lot of the glaze has been lost, but still has been one of the pieces that Catherine has loved more and inspired to produce a piece of ceramics quite similar, and with this lovely acorn and oak leaves that recall those that are painted there. So just a lovely way to finish, I think, this sort of lovely current show and appreciation on Maiolica. And I just want to conclude by thanking so much John Mallet for writing an essay in the catalogue called Between Art and Artifacts, in which he shows how much he loves and he knows the Courtauld collection. Thanking Sasha Gersten, who has accompanied me all the way in the work on the catalogue. Also Ellen Martin-Lick, which is the honorary curator, helped me to understand how the collection arrived at the Courtauld, the important role of Anthony Blunt, who was the director of the Institute then, who really fought for the collection and helped really all the Maiolica to arrive safely and help also restoring it. But I'm just here concluding, and just to thank you all for the attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Elisa, thank you for such a fantastic lecture, and it was such a treat just to really see how you took us through the collection, how it was formed, all those amazing objects. I particularly love the black and white photographs showing the paintings and the Maiolica together. Absolutely incredible, and just says so much about the history's collections and ceramics within that as well. So thank you so much. We have about 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes or so for Q&A. So if you have got a question for Elisa, please feel free to put that into the chat. I know a couple have already appeared already. So I'm going to dive straight into those, and then we'll sort of see how we go time-wise. But Elisa, thank you so much for that. Our first question has come through from Errol asking, or he says, it was wonderful to see how closely the Deruta artist copied the Perugino. Presumably there were no prints of it then. Do you think the artist sketched it from the actual painting, or were drawings circulating at that point?
Well, that is very interesting, because Perugino himself was one of the first artists to use tracings and cartoons, because he had a very busy workshop, and so he was repeating quite a lot during the end of his career, the same compositions. And this, I think, actually influenced Maiolica painters in using the same techniques. And I think the Deruta potters in particular used tracings a lot. And yes, he might have been a painter just sketching from the fresco, but I think it's probably workshop drawing circulating, and perhaps an artist working, helping Perugino in his fresco, perhaps on occasion could paint Maiolica as well, could take drawings with him, and how much this were circulating much more than we think.
Brilliant, thank you so much. You mentioned, of course, this collection had entered into the Courtauld in the 20th century. Are the Courtauld actively still collecting or acquiring new objects from this type, from Italian Renaissance ceramics or some of the French that you mentioned? Is that something that they're actively doing, or is it more as a closed collection? Could you say a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, well, actually, there are two pieces in the collection which have been recently donated, and were generously donated in honor, actually, of the work on the catalogue by San Paul. And I have not showed it. One of them is, I just show it from the book, I guess. One of these is one of the lovely tiles from the studiolo Isabella d'Este. So they are, yes, acquiring. Obviously, it's they have limited space, and not all of Maiolica are on display, not all of the ones are showed. There's a lovely case on the second floor, and the Deruta lusterware is all shown above the mantelpiece, hanging a lovely display that Sasha has curated. And yes, I think, yes, very much so.
Brilliant. Yes, I have to agree with you. The way that it's currently displayed since the reopening of the Courtauld a couple of years ago, they just they're so fresh and you can really see them up close with the lighting, and it's just so wonderful to get the opportunity to do that in a space which is such a traditional art historical collection in many ways, so which is just wonderful. Um, and I also really enjoyed that you showed us Catherine Moy, that the new objects from Collect. I saw them the other evening and I absolutely love what she's doing. And I do think it is interesting, have you find that there are other contemporary artists going back to MAIOLICA and more recently, or do you think she's quite unique in what she's doing?
Yes, and I think she has been particularly influenced by visiting the new Courtauld because she could see the objects so well and near, particularly the cylindrical jar. Being a student from Imperial College, had done a particular study on the jar, and she was particularly interested in the notion of measure, which it says on the inscription on the jar about measure and how you shouldn't have too much of the content of the jar, although we don't know what the content of the jar was. And so it's essential to have, pieces on display that people can go and see and appreciate, as she has done in a wonderful way.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We've had a question come in. You mentioned, of course, you showed us some wonderful images from Pico Paso. Could you say little bit more about the significance of that historical text?
Yes, it is really our Bible, really. It was written around 1557 with his beautiful drawings. Pico Paso was he really very talented. I mean, he was a civil engineer. He was asked to produce a manual. The 16th century in Italy is the sort of the time when manuals are written about everything, as I mentioned, the handwriting manuals and beauty manuals and everything you can possibly imagine that were manuals for. And he's invited to, he asked to write a book about pottery. Obviously, the most famous manual of all is the Vasari, the Lives of the Artists as well. It was a great time for sort of decoding and recording what was happening at the time. And these three books shows really the manufacturing process from gathering really the clay from riverbeds and from the hills up until the firing, second firing or third firing to the last ring, including really details on how to make molds, how to build a kiln. And so artists in the 20th century, such as Alan Cage Smith, have been inspired by building kilns following what Pico Paso said. And it's really fascinating. There's recipes for painting the hair, which color, all just blonde, hair is good, only blonde, and painting the flesh, painting the rocks, how you should mix different things. There's absolutely everything you might possibly want to know. There's yeah, it's essential really and fun and beautiful with beautiful drawings.
Yeah, absolutely. And if for anyone who'd like to know a little bit more, the V&A a few years ago digitized their copy of the treatise, which is really wonderful. So you can actually go through it online. So do have a look there.
Yeah.
I'm just aware of time, so I think we've got time for another couple of maybe two questions, and then we'll draw to a close. We've got a question come through from Diana Davis. Diana says, "Thank you for a wonderful lecture. You mentioned items acquired at the Stowe sale and in Italy. What were Gambier Parry's main means of acquiring MAIOLICA? So was he using dealers or did he buy principally at auction?"
Yeah, he bought certainly from English dealers such as Harry Durlasher, I don't know how to pronounce, also at those famous sales. By 1855, the time of the Bernal sale, he was out. He said it's just too expensive. The price has gone through the roof, and he's not, he did not buy any Maiolica, for example, Bernal. But he was always on the lookout for pieces, especially in Italy. He bought in Bologna, in Verona, in cities that are not associated with the market for Maiolica in general. And so he was constantly, he bought very independently. He wasn't relying on, I mean, he bought in Florence by famous dealer, by Spence, William Blundell Spence, for instance. He bought Cassoni from him. So a mixture really, but it was really independently buying, and he was also very wealthy. He had the means to buy.
Yeah, brilliant. So interesting, especially his the collecting in Italy itself, and then finding the best of the best at that point as well. Elisa, I think we really have to sort of draw to a close at this point. But before we do, could you tell us a little bit more about your book? Where can we acquire that? And any more information on that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, of course. It's on display at the Courtauld in the shop, in a lovely new shop that they have, following their opening. So that's so it can be bought in there and on the website. And there's also going to be a book launch on the 14th of March at the Courtauld itself in Vernon Square, at the campus where the institute is based temporarily, before relocating again at Somerset House. And there will be occasion for buying the books there. And I hope to see you, some of you, London-based, and you, Caroline, and Felix as well, hopefully.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you so much. And yes, for those of you interested in hearing more about the book launch, there has been information sent out to all members on that. So you can find more information and details there, and also some more information about the book itself. But all that's really left to say, Elisa, thank you so much for sharing your passion and your incredibly detailed work and knowledge over the last few years getting this book together. It's been a real joy for us. So thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you.
And thank you all
Pleasure to
so much
talk to
for joining us. I think we had about 80 people at one point, which is fantastic. Please do follow along on our social media channels and on the website for FPS. And I think at the moment, we're currently looking for newsletter content. So if you have any of that, do send it over to Felix. But other than that, take care, everyone, and have a fantastic evening or afternoon, wherever you are. And thank you so much. Goodbye.